Hi everyone, I'm Erin G, and this is Alt Text. Today, I'm joined by Toronto mayoral candidate and former member of Parliament for Whitby, Celina Caesar-Chavannes. Celina was the Liberal Member of Parliament for Whitby from 2015 to 2019, where she also served as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and also as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development. In February of 2019, she advised the Prime Minister that she would not be seeking re-election, and in March of that year, she left the Liberal caucus and finished the rest of her term as an independent, an action fueled by allegations of microaggressions and tokenization on behalf of the Prime Minister himself. In 2021, Celina published a book called Can You Hear Me Now?, which was nominated for the 2021 Shaughnessy Cohen Prize for Political Writing, and it details her upbringing, journey as a young Black woman entrepreneur, former politician, and the adversity that she had to overcome. In April 2023, Celina declared her candidacy for the mayor of Toronto after recently re-elected John Tory resigned following the confirmation of an affair with a staffer. Celina and I spoke about the healing she's done since leaving federal politics in 2019, how Toronto can't afford to continue to raise taxes on residents, and what it means to lead with empathy and compassion. So please enjoy my discussion with Celina Caesar-Chavannes. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I am interested in talking about so many things with you, but first and foremost, so you jumped into the Toronto mayoral race in
Yes.
April. What led to that decision? Because you left federal politics in 2019, and then you've kind of just been doing your own thing, and then suddenly here you are.
Yeah, so I think it took a little bit of time to heal from leaving federal politics and figure out exactly who I am and what I could offer, especially to a city like Toronto that, is facing some real significant challenges financially. And those challenges tend to impact, people from marginalized communities most. And so I think that intersection of, okay, what did I need to heal? How did that work? And then how do you translate that learning, that healing, but also an assuredness in myself into a new position as mayor of the city of Toronto? And I think that it was a perfect opportunity for me to jump in. And yeah, so here I am.
And why did you opt to go to municipal politics instead of provincial politics?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons, in terms of party politics and structure that I really didn't want to deal with at those levels. And I've had people say to me before, Celina, you have unfinished business in politics. And every time I thought about going into a federal or municipal campaign where there is not necessarily the party politics from cross-partisan type way, but even within your own party structure, it seemed like there was a lot more contention there. And in a municipal setting, working with councillors that don't have that political sort of interference, that are listening directly to views from their local constituents and then implementing those on a very practical, down to the earth type of way, I thought that was a much better model for me than fighting my party to fight for the people that I care about, which was my communities.
Mm-hmm. And what I really like about local politics in Ontario is that there isn't a party system.
Right.
I'm from BC, where we do have parties, and in Vancouver's municipal election in the fall, they basically A Better City Party basically cleaned house, and so now they've got this majority and are able to deliver on a quote unquote platform that they put together,
right,
without actually consulting and engaging with residents in a meaningful way,
right.
and instead are like spinning their policies as, well, this thing we did was good and all of these other people voted against it. Meanwhile, their actual policy is less than what, say, the provincial government would have supported them with. And so, yeah, I think that your perspective is really interesting because, you know, and you know how the challenges that come with party politics,
Right.
and both in terms of bipartisanship or multi-partisanship and within the structures and hierarchies of your own party.
For sure. For sure.
And so you talked about the process of healing over the past, I guess, 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So what has that been like? Because everyone's kind of also gone through this other trauma, which was the pandemic. And so we're all healing from that too. So
Right.
what was your healing process like from politics? And then did the pandemic either compound or help that process?
Yeah. So I think for me, the pandemic actually helped it. Because after leaving politics in 2019, I was really struggling because I felt like I needed to do something. I couldn't have any gaps in my resume. I'm a Black woman. Having a gap would be catastrophic for finding a next job. I couldn't find a job for a year. It was really starting to put a lot of pressure on me to perform, to do something. And then March of 2019 happened. Wait, no, 2020 happened. And like, it was like the universe was saying, Celina, if you don't stop moving, I will stop the whole planet. And the whole planet stopped. And it forced me to stop and really go inside myself. I signed up with the Chopra Center and became a certified health instructor, certified meditation instructor, really took a deep dive into Ayurvedic practices, which is a 5,000-year-old ancient Indian healing system. And really became a coach at it, not for coaching purposes, but just to have full circle on the healing journey that it entailed, and really started to find myself and reconnect with the most powerful version of Celina that there ever was, which is like the 3 to 5-year-old Celina that I'd forgotten, that was put away, that was told to be quiet, that was told, you're supposed to be seen and not heard. That was everything that, politics sort of placed me in like this very specific box. She was not. And I keep thinking that even in that dramatic sort of interaction with the prime minister, it was her that was released. It was her that came out and said, hello, enough of this. Like you are. And even in that moment, I didn't realize what that moment was, but that healing journey allowed me to actually take advantage of that moment and say, oh my God, little Celina wants to come out to play. The one that's been silenced, the one that's been traumatized, the one that's been pushed aside. She wants to come out and she is powerful. And so now I just need to let her come out without so much swearing. But still, I still swear, so that doesn't help either.
Well, we don't need to be precious about it, right? Like
Yeah,
we're adults.
because that's the version of her that is of me that is really amazing and is uninhibited and doesn't ascribe to the rules that were never written for or by me or people like me in the first place. And so why do I keep trying to silence her or be different from her? It's a silly notion. And so Celina's back.
That's a great message. It sounds a little bit like there's a book here somewhere.
Yeah, perhaps I started writing something called Finding Celina, but yeah, I'll see.
Yeah. I love this concept of play, because I think as adults, and particularly as a Black woman and other, well, like women in general, but then Black women, other women of color, we are so often told that we need to act a certain way. And like you said, you couldn't have any gaps in your resume because that looks bad, et cetera, and all these societal expectations.
Yeah.
But in doing so, one, of course, we lose touch with ourselves, but two, we also lose this concept of play, and that drains us. And I think that throughout, or for people that I know, the pandemic was in part a gift because it allowed us to kind of really deepen relationships that were there already, but it also helped us to kind of cut ties with people and relationships that weren't really serving us in a healthy and effective manner. I don't know if that was the same for you at all.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I needed to do was to find myself again, right? Which I mean, there's nothing better than stopping the world to have that happen for me personally. I don't want to judge anybody who this experience was different. It was traumatic, and I want to, leave space for that. But for me, it allowed me to just be at peace for the first time in my life, because there was no expectation for me to do anything. I didn't have to be twice as good. I didn't have to be twice as fast. I didn't have to be run twice as long. I didn't have to do anything that was a societal expectation, and it felt good. It felt good to do nothing. And
it's freeing a little bit.
It's freeing. And, one of the practices of meditation is being present and being in the now. And the one thing that moment allowed for me was for me to be in the present. So whenever anybody would ask me, Celina, what are you doing next? I'd be like, I'm doing now next. That's it. I have no plan. I have no plan. There wasn't like, next I'm going to be the mayor of Toronto. It was like, John Tory resigned. I put something on the internet. People responded to it. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Right. So it wasn't, and it is about, let's see if not so much of that we could have fun in this election. Fun is part of it, but let's see if we could love. If we've seen globally that hate can win, let's see if love can win too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I was in another conversation earlier today about the increasing polarization of politics in the US, globally, in Canada. And, we're talking on like the day after the Alberta election. And, it's really interesting that there is this increasingly divisive politics, and like the urban rural split is like just extremely hardcore these days. And so Toronto is this really interesting battleground it's just such a big place. Canada's largest city, but it's very urban. And then you kind of get a little bit broader into like the exurbs, and it's a little bit more quote unquote, rural. Suburban. I guess.
Yeah. And it really is. So this is an opportunity for Toronto to elect someone who is not just progressive, because I think progressive is a term that we use that is just, I don't know, it's still subpar for me, because, we have progressive candidates that are putting out platforms about increasing taxes at a time when people are struggling, they are burdened. And is there another way? Can you possibly use your progressive mindset to think outside of the box? If you know that when you tax people, that the rich find loopholes and that poor people cannot find those loopholes, and the rich will end up escaping from paying those taxes, and the poor will end up doubling down and paying it even more. Why are you doing that as a progressive? And you're not looking at like, who is this going to hurt the most? So you could say taxes, and property taxes in Toronto are low anyway. That's because they have a tremendous business base. It's supposed to be lower in Toronto than it is in Durham region. So if we're not like actually thinking this through at not just the breadth of what people are saying, but the depth of what they're saying, even as progressives, we are going to find ourselves in a holy moly crap situation, because the rhetoric is going to be, well, we got someone who was progressive, we got someone who was really supposed to be looking out for the little guy, and look what still happened. So told you that wouldn't work. Let's move on. Let's start to really start to pander to people who are going to listen to the Donald Trump type rhetoric that we had in the US. They're going to start listening to that here, because you're not looking out for poor folks. You're not looking out for this. I think, we're in the spiral.
I think that on the one hand, progressive is kind of meaningless because it seems to have usurped the word liberal.
Right.
Like people now just kind of like non-actual progressives, people who are more like liberal leaning, tend to use progressive instead of liberal, because to them, I think liberal means capital L, big L, liberal.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I just think that people that say that they are progressive need to think with a little bit more depth than just the status quo and maintaining the status quo and, chipping around the edges just a little bit. So it looks like I'm a little bit more progressive than Trump, or then I'm a little bit more progressive than the alt-right guy is
Yeah.
bullshit. Like, sorry, you could bleep that out, but it is, I don't have time for it. And
So,
you know what? It's really unnerving because we don't have time for a wolf in sheep's clothing.
mm,
We
mhm,
do not have time. We do not have time. We saw what the pandemic did to Black and Indigenous communities and communities of color in Toronto, where there was 80% of the burden of COVID-19 was falling on 52% of the population. That's actual nonsense. And
mhm,
if we're not going to take the time right now to look at those social determinants of health in a progressive way and not in a tax-based way, which is
mhm.
not the way to run a big city by itself. But anyhow, in a progressive way, then we're going to continue to leave those people behind as geopolitical issues get worse, as
Mhm.
climate change gets worse, as calls for social and racial justice gets worse, and as the recovery period of the pandemic lengthens. So what are we doing as progressives if we're not actually looking at the poorest and most vulnerable and saying, let's help them first? And
Mhm.
does taxing help them? No. So let's think of another way. It's not that hard. It's not a dissertation. It's just a decision.
So how would you define what it means to be a progressive then?
It's not, the progressive is bullshit. It's not a progressive.
Um,
What it means to govern and look at people's humanity and their dignity is to have a compassionate lens when policies are going through, to have a compassionate lens, meaning empathy in action. People are struggling right now. So what do? Well, do we tax or not tax? Well, tax is going to hurt people who are struggling. So how do we not tax and still get revenues in? That is looking at people's humanity.
mhm,
That is respecting their dignity. That is understanding, hey, in Ontario, the social assistance and social housing has been downloaded to the municipalities without a correct funding formula. So how do we start to collect revenues that account for that without taxing, which is
mhm.
not compassionate? Well, here we could do X, Y, and Z, or we could put an equity lens on this, this, and this. It's about humanity. It's about looking at our humanity with a degree of love and a degree of compassion, and it can be done. The challenge is most don't have the political will to talk about it in this way, and so it won't be done.
Would you say that political will is the same or different than having the courage to do it?
Oh, people can have the courage to do whatever they want for themselves, which is
Mhm.
an egotistical model. Political will, when you know you're gonna have to face people, is a different thing, which I know political will is tough. It's hard because you want to get reelected.
Mhm.
So if your mandate or your position is around, I need this to pay the bills, then you're probably not going to have the political will to do what is absolutely right by people because it's going to piss some people off.
It, I think I get the sense that after George Floyd and the massive Black Lives Matter DEI movement in 2020, that there was, the needle was moving a little. It was moving slowly, but it seemed like there were like people who were interested in changing things. But I get the sense now that, now that things are back to quote unquote normal, whatever that means, that all of those initiatives are going by the wayside because there's so many other distractions, and that all of that work takes so much effort, and it has to be deliberate, and it has to be intentional, and people just don't want to take the time to try to understand that. They don't want to see other people with humanity. But also those corporate initiatives aren't the same from the public as the public policy side. And to me, it almost seems like the public policy side has gotten worse. And I don't know if that's because of uh, the economy or inflation or what have you, but it just seems to me that things have kind of gotten worse from that equity lens in policy.
Can I swear on this podcast?
Absolutely.
So did people give a fuck in the first place?
I mean,
Right.
actually,
So everybody would, everybody talked about this woke agenda that is supposed to be dying. Like everybody after George Floyd, or most people, some of us were already awake, right? So we were awake, we were doing our thing. Then all of these people woke up and were like, oh my God, there's racism here? Holy shit, right? And they came around and they were like, I want to help all those people who are already awake. Right. So I liken it to like people who are awake, they made their bed, they cook breakfast, they're starting to make lunch, dinner, supper, they have all the snacks out. And then people that woke up are like, oh my God, well, you know what? I'm gonna make omelets because I really want to help make omelets. We're like, we have the fucking eggs already made. What are you doing? It's like, but I want omelets now because omelets are really, really good because they have vegetables and we don't care about your goddamn omelets. We've already made eggs. Get on board with making the eggs, or get some money into making more eggs or doing something else, but we're not doing omelets. It's like, oh, well, I want omelets. And now you're not giving me my omelets. So I'm going to like leave. Or you know what? Forget the whole woke movement anyways. I want to go back to bed. Who gets to decide who gets to be woke and who gets to go back to sleep? Right? Apparently it's people like DeSantis who gets to decide when and where and who could be woke. Well, the only people who was waking up, and excuse me, was a lot of white people and a few Black people too, who realized, oh my God, I am Black, right? So I'm sorry, but if you never gave a fuck before 2020, please take several seats. Your woke, your eggs, your whole freaking bunch of it, and go. Right. And so Celina, okay, that sounds really doom and gloom. So what do we do? Well, you put people in place, or you support people who are saying, no. Number one, I was already woke, right? Talking about race in 2018 when I was getting dragged for talking about it, instead of it being a leadership moment for Canada, get dragged for it. So put people in place who are doing the work. And I use myself as an example, but I'm a poor example of someone who was actually doing the work, right? So put people in place who are doing the work from time, support them because they know what they're doing. Nothing for us without us. They know what they're doing, right? And actually start to dismantle the policy. So go down to the root of the problem. In 2015 to 2019, there was not a dress code for women in Parliament. Not that that's where you want to start in fixing stuff by giving women dress codes, but like there are policies in place that keep the status quo moving, that keep patriarchy moving, that keep capitalism moving, that keep docile bodies docile. And it's time to wake up.
And we are just so bad at unpacking power in Canada. We don't want to talk about it because I think most people just don't understand it, and they view
some people should read Michael Foucault. Then they should read pick up a book. Pick up a book. You want to jump into how to be anti-racist, but you don't understand your own structures and how they were created. Read Punishment and Discipline from Michael Foucault. Understand the structures that you created for your own selves and how absolutely brain numbing and stultifying they are for your own self. And then you want to put me in there and expect me to survive? Understand your own system. But no, you want to talk about being anti-racist when you don't even understand your own house.
Clean up your own house before,
understand it. Then you could clean it. Then you can invite people in. But until such time, I'm good.
Yeah. And so what has your message been on the doorstep for voters in trying to convince them to understand the humanity of others and voting in maybe the best interests of others and than themselves, maybe?
So my plan at the doorstep is 100% on a principle or on a pillar of creating new revenue streams for Toronto, irrespective of what your intersecting identity is. If you do not run Toronto like a big city, like the research says a big city should be run, everybody at the bottom will stay at the bottom or be left behind. So anybody who's talking about, equity, this or this, these little fringe things that they know they have to throw in Black and Indigenous in their platform just because, and they're not looking at the actual structure, changing the structure itself, kick rocks.
Mhm.
Get out of here. I'm not trying to convince anyone at the door of anything other than they need to interrogate their candidates as to where the money is coming from.
Mhm.
Because if the money isn't coming from a new source, it's going to come out of your pocket.
Right.
And if you can't afford it and you can't afford a loophole, you are going to get squeezed. So good luck.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably a message that resonates with a lot of people and helps you stand out in a field of like 102 candidates.
100%. 100%. It is the message that will rise above the din, I hope. But again, it's not a exciting or shiny message. It's not a $100 million funding announcement where we don't have
Mhm.
no money in the bank. It's not that. It is talking about revenue streams.
Mhm. Yeah,
It
that's
couldn't be
tough.
more anti-Selena-esque to
Mhm.
be talking about something so fundamentally boring.
Yeah.
However,
It's like the
if
debt ceiling
Toronto was
conversation that's been going on.
right, but if Toronto was able to do this, not only will it be able to sustainably and predictably fund social housing and social assistance, it could lead the charge and change how every other municipality in this province works. So you don't think that in Oshawa they need housing paid for, or in Hamilton? This is a leadership moment. This is not a moment to decide that we're going to keep doing the same things that John Tory did.
Mhm.
And I'm not dissing Tory. I'm just saying he's not there. So let's change it up.
Well, yeah, and generally that's what you want from a new leadership, right? You don't
You would
want the
hope, but a front runner is talking about increasing taxes at a time when we're in recovery. So
yeah.
here we
Yeah.
are.
I mean, on the upside is that at least, it's not Vancouver where the new mayor said that he wasn't going to be increasing taxes, property taxes 10%, and then had to raise them 12%. So I was like, well, the math ain't math in there.
Mathing, yeah.
Um, you know, speaking of Tory, ever since he was elected, voter turnout in Toronto has fallen. And just last year, the election saw like voter turnout of like under 30%, which for a municipality that size is extremely low. And
Yeah.
so how are you trying to convince people to get out and vote? And is your message, do people even know that there's a by-election happening?
That's not my job. Sorry, I can't do Tory's job for him. That's not my job. Maybe 30% or less will show up at this election. My job when I'm elected is then to make sure that I'm engaging the electorate, that I'm accessible to the electorate, that the electorate can hold me to account. So they're not just engaging with me every 4 years, that they are engaging with me on a regular basis, that they're holding me to account. So part of my plan in generating these new revenue streams is to do it within 2 years, which is within or under my mandate. So when it's not done in 2 years, guess what? My third year is going to be very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? So you hold yourself to account in a reasonable way that people can engage, make yourself accessible. When I was a member of parliament, I made myself very accessible to people. And I was very honest with them. I never told anyone, I'll consider it. What's there to consider? You gave me your thing. I read it. I studied it. I did my homework before the meeting started. It's either a yes or a no. And if it's a no, I'm going to tell you how to make sure that it goes forward in some other way. I'm not going to make you feel badly about it. But I'm not going to say, oh, I'll consider it and I'll get back to you. No, yes, no. Very honest, very transparent, very engaging. Doors always open. I don't care who you are. It's usually the ones that were the worst actually had these standing meetings with me, the ones that would come in and say, everything you're doing is crap. Because you're meeting with them, right? Tell me why it's crap. And maybe I could fix it. But you're the one I want to listen to. So it's not my job to figure out how to get more people to vote right now. It's my job to do that when I'm elected.
And so as mayor, which is like a big job, how do you plan to keep engaging and interacting with your like residents?
So this is going to be interesting because it might sound counterintuitive to what I said before. So Tory was everywhere, did everything on all media outlets. You name it, he was there. I need to negotiate a carve out of a tax base so that we could have revenue streams for Toronto. If I don't show up at some parade or something, too bad.
Mhm.
It's going to be too bad, because we are facing unprecedented financial situations in Toronto.
Mhm.
The parade is probably not going to be the place that I could show up, right? I'm not going to be at every ribbon company. I'm not going to be at every business opening. I'm not going to be at every thing that's happening, because I need to negotiate a deal that's going to get us upwards of $500 million annually, period.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
It's priorities, right? So in that first couple of years, Celina might not be as available in terms of being in person at those events, but there's other ways to communicate what you're doing. So whereas my actual physical presence might not be always there, the communication has to be at a 110% all-time high, because if you're not communicating it, it's not happening.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between visibility,
Right.
out in the community at these ribbon cuttings or what have you, than there is at like a consultation or a round table to
Right.
like engage on a more meaningful level with people,
Right.
right? I think that people can confuse those things, and whereas like the job of the mayor is very ceremonial, and
Right.
it's not. It's to lead a city through
Right.
X crisis
We're going to
or
have
what.
to govern. We're going to have to like really govern, and we're going to have to change some things around.
Mhm, mhm. And it strikes me that there, for some people, or for most people who enter politics, at least at the start, it's a calling. They want to provide, be part of, be a public servant. They want to serve their residents, their constituents. But then there's definitely those who get distracted by the power and the access that the position holds,
Right.
and lose sight of the public service that they're actually supposed to be providing. And it seems to me that you have this very major sense of urgency about Toronto,
For
and
sure.
that if Toronto doesn't find this alternative funding sources, that it will have very dire consequences, not necessarily
Oh,
for
yeah.
like
It
for
already
residents
has.
and like the city. Yeah, exactly. And so I how do you maintain that perspective of being a public servant rather than a power player, even though they, in some
Ve-
instances, they may be overlap?
Very easy. This is a borrowed job. It doesn't belong to me. Being a member of parliament for Whitby or a mayor of city of Toronto, it's not my job. It's a borrowed job. I borrowed it from my constituents, and they could take it back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's either I get what I say I'm going to get done, or I lose the job. It's just that simple. And so if I'm always thinking that this is a borrowed job and I need to perform, at my top game to be able to do it, yes, that does involve utilizing my power, not for an egocentric perspective, but for getting what the people need to get done, leveraging the political power of my constituents through me to get what we need to get done. There's a different kind of mentality here when you're thinking about the fact that this job, this seat that you're sitting in, the big neck thing that they wear, they're all borrowed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not yours. So don't get comfortable.
Yeah. And I think I've been thinking a lot. So I turned 40 next year, and I've been thinking a lot about lessons that I've learned. And for me, one of the lessons is don't love your job too much, because it doesn't love you back and it will at some point disappoint you. And
Right.
so like having kind of that healthy relationship with it, I think, is always helpful.
For sure.
And so like having that toxic view of your role as a politician, whether it's an MP or a mayor, I think probably helps maintain that sense of public service.
I'm not sure if it's a toxic one. I think it's a reality. It's the reality is it's not your job.
Mm-hmm.
It's borrowed. It's not like it's not the same thing as applying for a job and working your way up the corporate ladder. It's not the same. This is a job that entails having doing the things that is, that you're supposed to be doing to run a city. But it also involves the fact that X amount of people are trusting you to do right by them. And so it is a responsibility. It's for me, it's a responsibility to ensure that while I have that borrowed job, that I do it properly, because people are expecting me to do well by them. They trusted me with that ballot. And so that responsibility, I take that very seriously, because I want to keep that job. Because I do love, and I did love being a member of parliament. I would love being the mayor of Toronto. And in that love for that job, which is borrowed from the citizens, that love then transfers on to the people that I'm serving.
I think that's a great place to end it. And I know you have to get going.
Oh, thank you so much. This was excellent.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to connect. Well, that does it for this week. I'll be back next week with a discussion about tech. But in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter, Erin_G, and also on Blue Sky. See you later.